Hello everybody, this is PopRocks bringing you a trick explanation video. Today we're going to be talking about a trick that I've kind of recently investigated, discovered, and performed. I call it the PR move, short for the PopRocks move, and I'm going to be going over some of the more nuanced details of this trick in order to kind of help other people replicate it and to improve upon it so that one day we might be able to use it in speedruns. So to go over just kind of the basics of what is this trick, like what are we looking at on screen. This is just before the successful attempt of this trick, where I finally made it over the river, and that's kind of what we're going for here today. This is a method of Taka Pass early, so this would be done very shortly after blooming Agata Forest, and you would either skip or do the Waka 1 fight, and then immediately after that, normally the game would expect you to go to Suta Ruins, and instead we can completely bypass that by doing a series of extremely difficult jumps to traverse out-of-bounds terrain and reach a point from where we can actually jump over the river rather than needing to do Suta Ruins and building a bridge with the Kokari boy. There is a way to already do this. It's done in New Game Any Percent runs. It's called Half Blue Skip. It is a trick that rather than to jump over the river, it is a trick where you kind of abuse cutscenes in order to prevent the river from washing you away, and it allows you to simply swim through the river unfazed. This is a method that's a little bit faster, that allows you to just go directly over the river without needing to do any kind of cutscene manipulation like so. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over some of the basic terminology and what kind of techniques are being used for this trick. In the background, this is just like a 20-minute video of me practicing, attempting to do the trick. So the first thing that's happening is called a D-boost, where I'm bonking into the merchant. And as the text box closes, I'm doing a tackle input, which is frame perfect. And basically, as soon as the text box closes, there's one frame where Ami is considered to be on the ground, and you can do a tackle in midair. That's called a D-boost, or a dialogue boost. Another term that's going to be essential to understanding what I'm talking about is the sliding ground tackle. So that's what we're seeing here, where as I'm hitting the slope, I'm inputting a tackle. And normally a tackle is done on the ground, and you don't get a lot of distance. You just tackle a very short distance along the ground. But if you input a tackle while you're on a slope, the slope's speed will allow you to kind of move while you're inputting the tackle. This allows you, rather than doing just a ground tackle, you can have a sliding ground tackle, and that will give you more speed and more distance than kind of a stationary tackle or a slow tackle, as I sometimes call it in this kind of context. Another thing that we're going to want to understand is a concept of a jump barrier. So anytime you have terrain like this, some of them, especially in like Ryoshima Coast or here, they have what's called a jump barrier. So basically, anytime you're over this mountain here, this cliff, if I am above the ground of the cliff, I cannot jump. In order to input these jumps, I need to leave the space above the cliff, just like anywhere above that cliff. If you press the jump button, simply nothing happens at all. Like the jump button is kind of blocked out from working. And this is basically to prevent players from doing the exact kind of thing that we're doing. They don't want you getting up here and then jumping all over the place. They want it that if you're up there, you just slide down. So in order to bypass that, what you do is you combine the sliding ground tackle to get enough speed and distance that you can get off of the edge of the cliff while still being in your tackle animation, and you can jump out of your tackle animation. So the kind of basic concept of what we're doing here is we're tackling away from the cliff, and then once we leave the jump barrier, we jump out of the tackle and return to the cliff so we can land back on it and kind of traverse this out of bounds terrain using that kind of series of inputs. So we're going to go through now and kind of talk about each part of the trick in order. The gameplay here is pre-recorded, so I'll try to sync up what I'm talking about with what you're seeing on screen the best I can. So the first thing we're going to want to get a hang of is what's going on with the dialogue boost, the very first part of the trick. So what you do is you do a wall jump against the side of the mountain there. You do have to do just a little wall jump. You don't need very much height, but you need just a little bit more height than you can get with a single jump. As one of the key components of this trick actually being useful is that this is being done when you only have single jump, because this is meant to be done very early in the game. In a speedrun, it would be like 15 minutes in, you'd be doing this kind of thing. So with single jump, you're just going to do a quick wall jump on the wall, and then you're going to tackle into the back of the merchant's stall. So from what I understand, the place where you tackle into the merchant's stall is not extraordinarily precise. It's a little bit higher than what you could tackle by just single jumping. You're kind of tackling the space above the stall. So you'll see when I'm doing this, I'm not like directly hitting it. You do want to hit like above the stall. There's a little bit of, there's still a hitbox where you can bonk into it above where you can physically see the stall. And you do see Ami's shadow at like kind of an angle as you're bonking into that stall. That's kind of what I'm looking for to make sure I'm tackling in the right spot. I want to see that shadow clearly above the merchant's stall as I'm tackling into it. So once you're bonking in there, you're going to have to be playing in the Japanese language so that the text box is short enough to close quickly. And you're going to have to use the fast text functionality, or on the Steam controls, it's actually referred to as skip message, but basically the fastest way of progressing a text box. Whatever you call that, that's what you got to hold. You have to close that as quick as possible without using like the skip cutscene button. And then on the final frame of that text box closing, you're going to input a tackle. Let's kind of watch how this goes here. You input a tackle, and then you jump out of the tackle. As soon as you get speed, you can't jump right away because you won't have any momentum. You have to wait for the tackle to kind of finish in a way. You have to wait long enough that you get basically tackle speed, and then you will jump out of it and do a wall jump, and then we're going to start trying to use that additional height we gain from the dialogue boost and the two wall jumps we did. We're going to try to land on the slope up here. So it's not extraordinarily precise, I don't think, to do this dialogue boost and this wall jump. I think they're fairly lenient, at least to what I understand. They're not free or anything, but they're not extremely punishing. So I don't think that's going to be a huge trouble for most people trying to learn to do the trick. What is pretty hard though is landing on the slope up there, landing on this kind of grassy cliff. As you can see, for my failing to land on it there, it is quite difficult. So initially when I was doing this was one of the hardest parts for me, is I would very frequently be trying to land on that slope, and it would feel like I only had like 1 or 2 frame input at most to do the tackle, to do a sliding ground tackle off of the slope, and I was just having a ton of time consistently getting the D-boost, getting onto this cliff, and then doing the sliding ground tackles like you're seeing here, and kind of getting everything started. It's very easy to slip off doing like the first or the second sliding ground tackle. So the strategy that I developed to kind of improve that is I will do a sliding ground tackle a little bit backwards for the first and sometimes the second SGT up here. So you'll see, if you look at like the input viewer, the left analog stick is the movement stick, or if you just look at kind of the direction Ami's moving, you can see I tackle a little bit backwards on the first and sometimes the second SGT. And that's kind of been my solution to more consistently getting this trick started and making it so that I'm not constantly tackling off the cliff and not, you know, gripping it properly and staying up there. So that's something I recommend. Is you see I'm kind of hugging the wall and then I tackle a little bit backwards. What I think happens is when you turn your character as you're doing that like sliding ground tackle, I think what we end up seeing is Ami tends to go a little bit slower, and it seems like it might make it that you have a wider window to input the your tackles for the first and the second tackles here on that slope. So that's something I strongly recommend giving a try. If you're having a hard time with that first or second SGT, it makes it extremely difficult to practice this trick. So whatever is working for you, you know, do that, because you really don't want to be stuck over and over sliding off this cliff. You really want to get as many attempts as possible into this stage here that we're looking at, where you're doing these tackles on that slope, because that part's also really difficult. So it is really important. Try out my technique there of kind of tackling backwards a little bit and see if that might save you a lot of time. It might make it easier. So once we're kind of on the slope, after like the second or the third SGT, at this point usually I'm pretty solidly on the slope. So once you're into that stage, that's kind of like the meat of the trick a little bit. That's when it like really gets cooking. And there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. Firstly, my goal while I'm doing this is, as I do the sliding ground tackle off of the cliff, my couple goals here. First goal is I want to maintain as high speed as possible. You never want to have a situation where you're sliding ground tackle, you get like a slow tackle, where you get that like slow tackle speed. You want to keep all your sliding ground tackles going as quick as possible. You want to really keep your character moving, which means you don't want to be turning around. Like, you can't tackle backwards. And I think you don't want to slide down the slope too much before inputting a tackle. I think that can also slow down the speed of your tackle. So you see, I'm always trying to get those like maximum speed tackles. There is kind of a method to how I help do that. You'll see if I happen to get on the mountain here, what I do is I kind of tackle straight and I start curving my character. Watch here, see as I curve to the left before I land. That is something I do that I think really helps me preserve speed. So that's something I recommend. You don't want to turn your character abruptly. You do want to be kind of curving yourself around and make sure that the game lets you maintain your momentum. So goal one is I'm, going along this cliff. I do want to make sure I'm keeping my speed as high as possible. Goal number two is I want to stay high on the mountain. So I don't want to be, once I'm past the second or third sliding ground tackle here, I don't want to be landing at the bottom of the mountain. I'm trying to climb the mountain as I'm doing this. And there's a very specific reason why. Is once you get past kind of like the sliding ground tackle, like 3, 4, 5, you get to a very slippery slope. And it seems like the way that jumping on like an out-of-bounds cliff like this works is you want to go from a higher slope to a lower slope when you're landing on really slippery terrain, to increase the chance that the game will actually allow you to land on the slope and do a sliding ground tackle. So I want to gain as much height as possible, kind of along the sliding ground tackles, like 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, so that once I start going to these last couple tackles before I'm crossing to the other cliff, those last couple tackles are going to be on very, very slippery terrain that will be very difficult to navigate, and I want to start high and then lose height as I'm doing those last couple of sliding ground tackles, because that's basically the only way that the game will allow you to touch the ground. If you start too low, you're just going to slide off the mountain, and it's going to be uneventful, and it's not going to work. So those are kind of the two things as you're kind of going along this kind of regular cliffside here that I'm keeping in mind. You're very concerned about speed, and then you're going to want to start gaining height while you're on the easier section. The main threat to kind of progressing along this cliffside is the jump barrier. So the jump barrier starts out being only a very short path away from where you're landing. Like you'll see, I'm doing I'm able to jump very close to the cliff initially, but then the further I go, I have to go more far away from the cliff in order to jump. So that's the main pain point for kind of that middle section of the trick, is you want to be tackling off the edge of the cliff, and you want to jump out of your tackle as soon as possible so that you can get back to the cliff in that desirable high position on the cliff. But you can't jump too soon, otherwise you will still be in the jump barrier. As you can kind of see with this angle, the cliff starts getting bigger and bigger below the slope that you're doing the sliding ground tackles. So the jump barrier becomes more difficult to avoid in this middle section of the trick. And once you get to the point where you're keeping the speed, you're getting all of that good height, and you're avoiding the jump barriers perfectly, then you're going to start getting to that the end section of the trick, the very slippery, difficult terrains to navigate, and that is where, you know, kind of the helpful, well-informed advice I have starts to become less well understood and easy to explain. That end section of the trick, there may be a better way to do it. I'm only doing it kind of the way that I've found. I have been kind of researching this trick for about 35 hours by this point. So it has been a lot of time, but it is very, very difficult to kind of navigate the slope physics and find practical ways to continue doing the trick once you're so far along and you had such a journey to even get that far, and then you have to find a new way to do something. It makes it very user unfriendly. So basically what I'm going to do is next time I get to that section, I'll kind of go over in a little bit more detail the specific benchmarks that I'm looking for when doing this trick. Yeah, basically the very last sliding ground tackle of kind of the core part of the trick, and by that what I mean is until I jump from this mountain to the next mountain. Let me see if I can pause here. So my mouse cursor is going to be up here for a little bit. Normally when I'm aiming for my final sliding ground tackle on this kind of easier part of the slope, which is kind of this section right here, is what I consider to be like the easier slope. I'm trying to land kind of up here. This is how high I want to be. You can see the cliff kind of ends over here. I'm going to be right up here. I'm going to tackle to this direction here. And once I get past the jump barrier, I'm going to jump forward, and I'm typically landing, there's a seam here. I want to land like inside the seam as high as I can, not too close to the seam, but not too much further. So let's see how that happens. So you see I'm going to go up here, and then unfortunately I got stopped by the jump barrier. My angle wasn't perfect there. But it looks like within another minute we're going to see that successful attempt coming back. As the end of my B-roll is coming up here, and I'll just start that over again. But yeah, so you're going to want to, you know, refine the way that you're doing those last couple jumps, because like I said earlier, you're going to be going from all that height that you've been trying to build up. You're going to be kind of using that height to make your sliding ground tackles work. Those two slippery slopes, like right at the end there. And then from that point, you can simply jump over to the other side and do the final part of the trick, which was originally hypothesized by Dream Rifty as a way that New Game could get over the river. Dream just needed somebody to figure out how to get up there. So this is that. So I believe this is the successful attempt. So let's kind of look how this is going. So you can see that I'm repeatedly sliding off of the slope, and I'm jumping as soon as possible once I'm out of the jump barrier. So that's something that's really important. You can see where I'm landing on the final part of the easy slope, trying to get as high as I possibly can, and I'm tackling out of the jump barrier. And we're going to be landing, here's the seam, I'm landing on the inside of the seam, not too far from it though. And then the last thing we're going for is with the final slide here. There's another seam that's kind of like right around here. We're going to be going past that seam, and we're landing on a section of the mountain that we're not normally on. Normally we're landing on kind of the slopes up here, but this sliding ground tackle is super difficult, and it's going to be done, you can see it's like off the slope a little bit. And then this is how we transition it into the actual practical application. We go to the other side of the cliff here, which is much easier. You can walk along it, and you can do these sliding ground tackles, which are a lot easier, except for the very last one, which can be a little bit tricky and takes a little bit of practice. And from there, we are able to jump over the river, and it's easy peasy. So that's kind of most of what I wanted to cover here with this trick. One thing to note is I think I'm about to cut a tree. That tree gets kind of in the way of the hardest part of the trick. So cutting it's not a bad idea. Yeah, hopefully the very end of the trick, that last sliding ground tackle before you kind of jump over from this mountain to the next one, that part of the trick is really, really difficult. It's kind of a crapshoot, and that's the worst part of the trick right now, is that very last sliding ground tackle is extremely inconsistent. As you saw throughout the video, I had multiple attempts where I was able to get all the height and speed and positioning that I wanted, and I tried to get that tackle, and it was just completely not possible for me. That tackle, it seems to be extremely unlikely that the game allows you to touch that slope. I mean, it certainly was never meant to be landed on by a player, and it doesn't function very well at all. And then even when you do land on it, sometimes you can get a seam grip, which basically would kill your momentum and fully land you on a slope. Sometimes you will do a sliding ground tackle, but you will get a low speed tackle, which is not enough to make it across the gap. You need to get that full speed sliding ground tackle. And frequently, sometimes you just won't touch it at all. Like you'll just slide right down the slope as if you could never have landed on it. So there may be other strategies to land on that sliding ground tackle more effectively right before crossing there. It is possible there could be a strategy involving bonking, including using the first-person glitch to redirect the momentum of your bonk, or tackling in midair and then landing after that, or maybe some other series of sliding ground tackles. Maybe there's a slightly different kind of jumping pattern you can do that would allow you to get further along the slope and make it so there's somewhere easier you can land other than where I end up doing that trick. So let's see how this is going to go for me. So here you can see that was a pretty good attempt, and basically I go to where that final sliding ground tackle happens. I try to input a tackle within like a frame or two of when I believe I'm going to land. Most commonly, you just don't ever end up touching the ground there, and you will just air tackle helplessly and fall down. So that's definitely the biggest remaining barrier with the trick, and what will prevent it from being used in speedruns in the near future, but hopefully will be solved over time. The other thing I want to mention really quick, a little bit about the technique of how to do the sliding ground tackles, kind of during the middle section of the trick here. Once I get an attempt on this video here, where I'm able to kind of get there again, I do kind of want to draw attention to the way that I'm moving during these sliding ground tackles. So what you want to see is I'm usually going to be doing sliding ground tackles that are almost perpendicular to the edge of the cliff. I want to have a little bit of diagonal so that I can keep forward momentum. However, I don't want to tackle along the side of the cliff, because then you don't get out of the jump barrier quickly enough. It's more important to get out of the jump barrier quickly so that you can tackle your cancel with a jump and jump back towards the cliff. The reason why that's important is because that is how you gain height on the cliff. If you're kind of tackling too forward, too much along the edge of the cliff, you can still progress forward, but you're going to be tackling and jumping very late out of the tackle. And this is going to mean you stay towards the edge of the cliff when you want to be getting further along the mountain. You want to be higher on the slope, and not so much. You don't want to prioritize going forward. You want to prioritize going up for this section, because you can just do an extra sliding ground tackle and get more forward. But the momentum going up the mountain is something that you have to be persistently working towards. You can't just do an extra jump and go all the way up the mountain. You want to be persistently kind of building up that height. So that's, you can see when I'm doing that. If you kind of rewatch some of the clips here, you do want to tackle kind of straight off, not exactly straight off, but just at a slight angle off the mountain, such that you get out of the jump barrier quickly, and then you can jump back and return to the slope as quick as possible. And that's something that will prevent a lot of mistakes where you're not making it out of the jump barrier, or where you are making it out of the jump barrier, but you land so low on the slope that you're not really able to progress forward with the trick once you get away from this easier slope and you reach the point where you're getting to this harder section right here. That harder section is just not going to let you land if you don't start with enough height. So that's going to be everything I kind of want to discuss here. The only other thing I would mention is it is really difficult to practice this other side of the mountain without using like the cheat engine. What you can do with cheat engine is you can use it to launch yourself into the air by increasing your Y coordinate, and you can easily land on this slope, which is really easy to navigate, and then do some tries jumping over the river. If you have to learn how to jump over this river only from successfully doing the trick, it will be really difficult. This part of the trick is significantly easier, but it is easy to mess up the first couple times. These sliding ground tackles are really easy. I do 3 of them here, and then this 4th one is the one where I'm going to be jumping over the river. And this one I try to land just a step or 2 from the edge of the slope, and that's what I find is helpful. And then you want to jump late out of the tackle, and you want to tackle once you start getting too much vertical momentum, you start falling very quickly, then you want to use that air tackle to kind of reset that momentum. Another tip I want to give is you can tell when Ami's in the jump barrier by looking at her shadow. if Ami's shadow is on the floor where I'm running along right now, then you're able to jump. If your shadow is showing as being on the cliff, you will not be able to jump. So if you're having trouble like figuring out if you're in the jump area, you may consider adjusting your camera angle, or just kind of keeping the shadow in the corner of your eye, and you can kind of see that I'm only jumping when my shadow is not on this kind of brown section of the cliff down here, because that's how the jump barrier works. Is you need to be off of the cliff in order for your jump button to be allowed to function there. So that's something that you can use as kind of a cheat sheet, a little bit of a guide there, if you're having trouble with the jump barrier and with that causing you problems. So I'm going to cut that off here. Hopefully this was kind of an interesting explanation on what this trick is and how I have theorized is the best way to do it. And hopefully somebody will be able to use it in runs, improve upon it further, and find, able to get more exposure and more practical use. As of right now, it's seeming like it would only be used in like a segmented run or tool-assisted speedrun. But with a little bit more manpower, it may end up being like RTA viable if we're lucky, and we can find some good ways to develop it further. So that's going to be all for now. Thanks for watching. This is PopRocks talking about the PR move, and hopefully you learned something.